His mother was dying, and everyone knew she had only a few hours left. Standing beside her hospital bed, Ethan held her trembling hand, desperately trying to stay strong. He was her only son, a wealthy, successful young man who had spent years building the kind of life most people could only dream about. He had money, influence, expensive cars, and women from powerful families hopping to marry him. But his mother wanted none of them. With her final strength, she pulled Ethan closer and whispered a request that left him completely speechless. "Promise me you will marry Emily." Ethan froze. Emily was a poor village girl he had barely spoken to since childhood. She lived with her grandmother in a tiny mud house, sold vegetables at the roadside, and owned almost nothing. She had no university education, no wealthy family, and certainly no place in the glamorous world Ethan had created for himself. Ethan thought his mother was confused, but she tightened her grip on his hand. "Promise me," she repeated, tears filling her eyes. Unable to deny his dying mother her final wish, Ethan reluctantly agreed. 3 days later, she was gone. And weeks after her burial, Ethan shocked his wealthy friends, business partners, and relatives by returning to the village and marrying Emily. People laughed. Some said she had trapped him. Others believed Ethan had lost his mind. Even Ethan himself wondered whether he had just made the biggest mistake of his life. But on the night after their wedding, Emily revealed something his mother had kept hidden from him for more than 20 years. Something that changed the way Ethan saw his family, his fortune, and the woman he had just married. Why had Ethan's mother chosen Emily above every other woman? What secret connected the poor village girl to Ethan's family? And what happened after Ethan finally discovered the shocking truth behind his mother's final wish? Before we continue, if you believe a person's worth should never be measured by wealth, status, education, or where they come from, kindly subscribe and turn on the notification bell right now. Stories like this remind us that sometimes the people society overlooks are carrying the greatest sacrifices, the deepest loyalty, and the truths powerful people desperately want buried. Stay with us until the end, because what Ethan discovered about Emily, his mother, and the fortune he had proudly called his own was far more shocking than anyone in the village could have imagined. Ethan did not sleep that night. He sat on the edge of the wooden bed inside the small room Emily's grandmother had prepared for them, still wearing the white shirt from the wedding ceremony. Outside, the village of Willow Creek had gone quiet. Crickets sang beneath the moonlight. Somewhere beyond the trees, a dog barked twice and stopped. The smell of damp earth drifted through the open window. It was a world completely different from Ethan's penthouse apartment overlooking the city, where glass walls, polished marble, automated lights, and silent elevators had surrounded him for years. Emily stood near the window. She had already removed her wedding veil. In her hands was an old brown envelope. Ethan stared at it. "What is that?" Emily did not immediately answer. She looked frightened, but not in the way Ethan expected. She did not look like a woman afraid that her wealthy husband might abandon her. She looked like someone afraid of what the truth might do to him. "Your mother gave this to me," she finally said. Ethan stood. "When?" "3 months ago." His face hardened. 3 months. Emily nodded. "That was before she went into the hospital." Ethan stepped toward her. "You met my mother without telling me. She came here. To this village." "Yes." Ethan almost laughed. His mother had been weak for nearly a year. Even walking across her living room had exhausted her. "You expect me to believe she traveled 4 hours from the city to see you?" "She didn't come alone. Her driver brought her." Ethan stared at the envelope again. His mother's handwriting was across the front. "For Ethan." His stomach tightened. There was something unsettling about seeing those two words. During the final weeks of Margaret Reed's life, she had written very little. Her hands had trembled too badly. Yet there it was. For Ethan. Why didn't she give it to me herself? Emily lowered her eyes. She said you wouldn't have believed her. Believed what? Emily extended the envelope. That the life you think belongs to you began inside this village. Ethan took it slowly. For a moment, he remembered something his mother had told him years earlier. He had been 21, impatient, arrogant, eager to expand Reed Industries after graduating from business school. Margaret had walked into his father's old study while Ethan was examining maps of company-owned farmland. He had proudly told her that one day he would double everything his father had built. Margaret had looked at him strangely. Then she had said, "Be careful calling something yours simply because your name is written on it." At the time, Ethan had laughed. "What does that mean?" Margaret had touched the edge of his father's desk. "It means names can be written over other people's sacrifices." Ethan had forgotten the conversation almost immediately. Now, standing in a poor village bedroom with his dead mother's letter in his hands, he remembered every word. He tore open the envelope. Inside were 4 pages and a small brass key. The first line made his breath stop. "My dear Ethan, if you are reading this, then you kept your promise to me long enough to marry Emily." He looked at her. "You knew." "Only part of it." He continued reading. "I know you are angry. You have every right to be. I have hidden a truth from you for 26 years because I was afraid of what it would do to our family. That fear became cowardice, and cowardice became silence. If I had been braver, you would have grown up knowing that the Reed fortune was never built by the Reeds alone." Ethan's jaw tightened. He continued, "Long before your father became the man whose portrait hangs in the headquarters lobby, he was a struggling salesman with more ambition than money. Your father, William Reed, came to Willow Creek when we were young because he believed farming communities could become profitable suppliers for city supermarkets. He had ideas, but ideas were all he had. Another man had the knowledge. His name was Henry Carter, Emily's grandfather." Ethan slowly lowered the letter. Emily said nothing. "My grandfather." Ethan looked at her. "Your grandfather worked with my father." Emily's voice was quiet. "Yes, that's impossible. My grandmother says they worked together for 7 years." "No." Ethan shook his head. "My father started Reed Agricultural Supply by himself. That's what everyone was told." The room suddenly felt smaller. Ethan returned to the letter. "Henry Carter understood the land better than anyone I had ever known. He developed the preservation method that allowed vegetables grown in Willow Creek to remain fresh long enough to reach markets hundreds of miles away. He designed the first storage system. He negotiated with the farmers. He convinced families who distrusted outsiders to join the cooperative. Without Henry Carter, Reed Agricultural Supply would have died before its 2nd year. But Henry was not merely your father's employee. He was his partner." Ethan's hands began to tremble. He read faster. "They agreed to divide the company equally. 50% belonged to William. 50% belonged to Henry. There was no formal corporation then, only handwritten agreements, receipts, journals, and 2 young men who believed a handshake still meant something. Then success came. And success changed your father." Ethan stopped. His father had been dead for 6 years, but William Reed remained larger than life everywhere Ethan went. Business magazines had called him a visionary. Universities had invited him to speak. There was a bronze statue of him outside Reed Industries headquarters. Ethan had spent his entire adult life trying to become worthy of that legacy. He could almost hear his father's voice. "Never apologize for winning, son. The world remembers builders, not complainers." Ethan had admired those words. Now they sounded different. He kept reading. When investors arrived, they wanted paperwork, they wanted incorporation documents, they wanted ownership records. Your father prepared them. Henry trusted him. That trust destroyed him. William registered the company under his name alone. Ethan felt as though the floor had shifted. "No." Emily looked away. "No," Ethan repeated. He turned the page. When Henry confronted him, William promised to correct the documents. He never did. Instead, he told investors that Henry was merely a local supplier. By then, the company was growing quickly. Your father offered Henry money to disappear. Henry refused. He did not want charity. He wanted his name restored. Ethan's breathing became shallow. The letter continued. Then came the fire. He looked up. "What fire?" Emily's face changed. For the first time that evening, tears appeared in her eyes. The old storage barn. Ethan remembered photographs. A fire had destroyed Reed Agricultural Supply's first warehouse shortly before the company expanded into the city. His father had always described it as the worst night of his career. But Margaret's letter told another story. The fire destroyed contracts, accounting ledgers, partnership notes, and most of the records Henry could have used to prove his ownership. Your father said it was an accident. Henry never believed him. Neither did I. Ethan lowered the pages. My father burned the warehouse. Emily shook her head. I don't know. But my mother thought he did. She suspected it. Why would she stay married to him? The question came out harsher than Ethan intended. Emily looked at him. Maybe the answer is on the next page. He read, You may wonder how I could remain beside a man after discovering what he had done. There is no answer that makes me look honorable. I loved your father. I was pregnant with you. I was afraid. And when Henry threatened to take the matter to court, something happened that changed everything. Henry's truck was struck on the highway. He died before reaching the hospital. Ethan closed his eyes. Emily's grandfather had died when Emily's mother, Rachel, was 17. Margaret continued. After Henry's death, William gave his widow, Ruth, a small payment and told everyone it was compensation for years of service. It should have been half the company. Ruth refused to fight. She had just buried her husband. She had 2 daughters to feed. She had no lawyer and no money. William had both. And I remained silent. Ethan's throat tightened. He looked toward the window. Outside that little room, Reed Industries owned processing plants in 4 states. His company supplied grocery chains, restaurants, hospitals, and schools. He had once appeared on the cover of a financial magazine beneath the headline, The Heir Who Turned a Family Business into an Empire. Family business. The words now felt almost obscene. But there was still more. Ethan read the final page. Years later, I tried to repair what I could. I secretly sent money to Ruth. She returned it. I offered Rachel a university scholarship. She refused that too. The Carters wanted only one thing from us. The truth. Your father would never give it. Then, when you were 7 years old, you came with us to Willow Creek. Ethan froze. A memory returned. Summer sunlight. A river. Children laughing. His mother screaming his name. He had almost drowned that summer. He remembered falling from a wooden footbridge. He remembered cold water swallowing him. Then nothing. His father had always said one of the farm workers pulled him out. Margaret's letter revealed the truth. You fell into Miller's River after chasing a red ball across the footbridge. The current dragged you beneath a fallen tree. I could not swim strongly enough to reach you. Your father froze, but Rachel Carter jumped into the river. Emily's mother. Ethan looked at Emily. She nodded slowly. My mother. Ethan returned to the page. Rachel saved your life. She struck her head against a rock while pulling you from the water. She survived, but the injury caused seizures for the rest of her life. Your father paid the hospital bills quietly and insisted that no one speak about what happened. He said he did not want the newspapers asking why Henry Carter's daughter had been near us. Rachel never complained. She never asked for anything. But before we left the village, she told me something I have carried in my heart ever since. No amount of money can clean a lie, only truth can. Ethan sank onto the bed. His hands covered his face. For several minutes, neither he nor Emily spoke. Then Ethan whispered, "How did your mother die?" Emily's lips trembled. When I was 13. From the seizures. Eventually. Ethan looked up. Emily sat beside the window. My mother could be perfectly fine one moment, she said, and then suddenly collapse. Sometimes she woke up quickly, sometimes it took hours. Emily stared into the darkness. When I was little, I thought everyone's mother fell down like that. Her voice carried no accusation. That made it worse. I remember one morning, she continued, she was making biscuits. I was sitting at the table doing homework. She dropped the bowl. Emily swallowed. I knew what was happening, so I moved the chair away and put a folded towel under her head. I was 9 years old. Ethan looked down. I'm sorry. She never blamed you. I didn't know. She knew that. Emily turned toward him. She always said you were a child. Ethan's eyes filled with tears. She saved my life. Yes. And my father hid it. Yes. Ethan stood abruptly and crossed the room. There was too much inside him. Anger, shame, disbelief, grief. He wanted to dismiss the letter as the confused confession of a dying woman. But his mother had named dates, places, documents. Then Ethan remembered the brass key. He pulled it from the envelope. What does this open? Emily pointed toward the bottom of the final page. There was a postscript. The key opens a metal box beneath the floorboards of the old Carter mill. Henry hid what survived the warehouse fire there. I discovered it 15 years ago. I could not bring myself to expose your father while he lived. That was my greatest failure. Do not repeat it. Tell the truth, Ethan. Even if the truth costs you everything. And understand one more thing. I did not ask you to marry Emily because you owe her family. A marriage built on guilt would be another kind of theft. I asked because I watched the man you were becoming. You were surrounded by people who admired your name, your money, and your power. Very few loved your soul enough to challenge you. Emily does. She once had every reason to hate you, yet when I came here sick and ashamed, she gave me water, covered me with a blanket, and listened while I confessed. She showed me more grace in one afternoon than I showed her family in 26 years. Your father taught you how to build wealth. I pray Emily will remind you how to build a life. Ethan read the final sentence 3 times. Then he looked at Emily. You knew all this before agreeing to marry me. Not everything. What did you know? I knew my grandfather helped start your father's company. I knew my mother saved you. And you still agreed. Emily hesitated. Your mother asked me to. That's not an answer. No. She took a breath. When I was 10, you came to the village with your mother. Ethan frowned. I don't remember. You probably wouldn't. Emily smiled faintly. You were wearing white sneakers. They were completely wrong for the mud. Despite himself, Ethan almost smiled. You were standing near the market when 3 boys started making fun of me because my dress had been patched. Ethan listened. You told them to stop. I did. You gave one of them $5 and told him that if he was going to spend his time studying someone else's clothes, he should at least learn enough about fashion to charge for his opinion. Ethan laughed softly. That sounds annoyingly like me. It was. Then Emily's expression softened. After they left, you bought every tomato on my grandmother's table. Why? You said you hated tomatoes. Now Ethan truly smiled. That also sounds like me. I asked why you bought them. Emily paused. You told me because people shouldn't have to lose before anyone notices them. The smile disappeared from Ethan's face. He had no memory of saying it. Yet something about the sentence sounded like the boy he might once have been. Before private schools. Before boardrooms. Before his father taught him to measure people by usefulness. Emily looked at him carefully. For years, whenever people told me you had become arrogant, I remembered that boy. And you thought he was still somewhere inside me. I hoped he was. The following morning, Ethan and Emily walked to the abandoned Carter mill. Ruth Carter came with them. Emily's grandmother was 78, thin and strong, with silver hair tied beneath a faded scarf. She had watched Ethan throughout the wedding without smiling. Now she carried a lantern, even though the morning sun was bright. The old mill stood beyond a field of tall grass. Its roof sagged. Vines covered one wall. When Ruth pushed open the door, dust rose around them. Ethan stepped inside and felt a strange chill. His family's company logo contained a drawing of a mill wheel. He had seen it thousands of times. On trucks, buildings, invoices, television commercials, award plaques. He had always assumed his father created it. But there, carved into a wooden beam blackened by age, was the same wheel. Beneath it were 2 initials. H.C. Henry Carter. Ethan touched the carving. Ruth watched him. Your father liked that wheel, she said. Ethan turned. He stole the logo too. Ruth's expression was tired. William didn't think of it as stealing. What did he call it? Winning. The word struck Ethan because it was exactly what his father would have said. Never apologize for winning. Ruth walked toward the far corner. Henry believed they were brothers, she said. That was his mistake. She pointed to 3 floorboards. Ethan knelt. The brass key opened a rusted metal lock beneath them. Inside the box were journals wrapped in oilcloth. Contracts, photographs, receipts, letters, and a folded partnership agreement. The paper was yellow, but the signatures were clear. William Reid, Henry Carter, equal partners, 50% each. Ethan sat on the floor. There was no denying it now. One photograph showed both men standing beside the mill wheel. Henry Carter held a crate of vegetables. William Reid had his arm around him. On the back, someone had written, To the beginning of something we build together. Uthan stared at the word together. His phone rang. It was his uncle, Charles Reed, William's younger brother. Uthan almost ignored it. Then something inside him whispered that Charles might know. He answered. "Where are you?" Charles demanded. "At the Carter Mill." Silence. It lasted 2 seconds too long. Uthan's eyes narrowed. "You know this place?" Charles cleared his throat. "Of course I know it. Your father bought Produce there years ago. I found Henry Carter's partnership agreement." Silence again. This time longer. Uthan felt cold. "Uncle Charles, you need to come back to the city." "You knew." "Uthan, you knew." "Listen to me carefully. Old papers don't tell the whole story. My mother's letter does." Charles inhaled sharply. "What letter?" Uthan now had his answer. "You knew. Your father made difficult decisions. He stole half a company. He built that company with Henry Carter. Henry would have destroyed it." Ruth closed her eyes. Amelie stared at Uthan. Charles continued. "Henry had no vision for expansion. Your father did. So that gave him the right to erase him. Business isn't a Sunday school lesson, Uthan." Uthan looked at the old photograph. "No," he said, "but theft is still theft when a man wears an expensive suit." Charles lowered his voice. "If you start digging into this, you could destroy Reed Industries. Maybe it deserves to be destroyed. Thousands of people work for that company. And how many of them know whose company it actually was?" Charles became quiet. Then he said something Uthan never forgot. "You have spent your entire life enjoying what your father protected. Don't become righteous now because you married some village girl." Uthan's face changed. Amelie heard it. So did Ruth. "Her name," Uthan said, "is Amelie Reed." Charles laughed bitterly. "For how long?" Uthan ended the call. 3 days later, he returned to the city with Amelie. The reaction was immediate. Photographers waited outside his home. Business blogs published photographs from the village wedding. One headline read, "Billionaire heir's mystery bride, who is Amelie Carter?" Another called her the vegetable seller who married into an empire. Amelie read that headline once. Then she placed the phone done. Uthan watched her. "You don't have to read those. I've been called worse things." "By whom?" Amelie smiled. "People who thought money made them interesting." Uthan almost laughed. For the first time, he began noticing how little Amelie seemed impressed by the things everyone else worshipped. His penthouse did not amaze her. His cars did not amaze her. The private elevator did not amaze her. But when she discovered the building superintendent had worked there for 32 years, she spent nearly 20 minutes asking him about his children. When Uthan's housekeeper, Maria, brought breakfast the next morning, Amelie stood up and helped her carry the dishes. Maria stared at her. "No one does that." Amelie looked puzzled. "Does what?" "Helps." That single word embarrassed Uthan more than he expected. For years, Maria had placed food in front of him. He had never once asked whether the tray was heavy. The board meeting that week was worse. Charles had already warned the directors. When Uthan entered, 12 powerful men and women sat around the table. Amelie was not with him. He had asked her to attend. She refused. "This is your decision," she told him. "If I stand beside you, they'll say I manipulated you. They'll say that anyway. Then don't make it easy." Uthan placed copies of the partnership agreement before every director. The room erupted. Some called it irrelevant. Others demanded forensic testing. One director asked whether Amali's family planned to sue. Uthan answered calmly, "They haven't asked for $1." That silenced the room. Charles leaned forward. "Then why are we here?" "Because the company's official history is a lie." Charles sighed. "We can update a plaque." Uthan stared at him. "A plaque? What exactly do you want?" "I want an independent investigation into Henry Carter's ownership. And if the documents are real." "They are real." "If they are," Charles repeated, "what then?" Uthan looked around the table. "Then we return what was stolen." Several directors began speaking at once. Charles slammed his hand down. "Half this company is worth hundreds of millions of dollars." Uthan did not move. "I know. You would give that away." "It wouldn't be giving." He looked at his uncle. "It would be returning." Charles rose. "Your father would be ashamed of you." The old Uthan might have cared. The old Uthan had built his life chasing praise from a dead man. But now he remembered his mother's handwriting. "Do not repeat my failure." Uthan stood. "My father's approval has already cost this family enough." The investigation took 6 weeks. It confirmed everything. Signatures, bank deposits, old invoices, witness statements, even an archived newspaper photograph showing Henry Carter and William Reed beneath a banner reading Reed Carter Farm Cooperative. The Carter name had later been cropped from company archives. But the most devastating evidence came from an unexpected place. Charles's office. After the board ordered a document search, attorneys discovered a sealed folder hidden inside a locked filing cabinet inherited from William. Inside was a letter Henry Carter had written days before his death. "William, I do not want to destroy you. I want you to remember who you were before money taught you to fear sharp. We built this together. Put my name back where it belongs, and I will forgive everything else. Henry." Uthan read the letter alone. Then he cried. Not because he had lost respect for his father. That had already happened. He cried because Henry Carter had offered forgiveness before receiving justice. And William had chosen neither. That evening, Uthan returned home and found Amalie on the balcony, watering a plant Maria had given her. He handed her Henry's letter. She read it slowly. Then she pressed it against her chest. "My grandmother should see this." "She will." Amalie noticed Uthan's face. "What happened?" He sat down. "I spent my whole life wanting to become my father." Amalie lowered herself into the chair beside him. "What if everything good in me came from my mother and everything successful came from him? Why do you assume success belongs to him?" Uthan looked at her. Amalie gestured toward the city. "You think success is those buildings? What else would it be?" "My grandmother raised 2 children after losing her husband. She buried a daughter and still found enough strength to raise me. She fed neighbors when she barely had food herself." Amalie smiled sadly. "She never owned a company." Then she looked directly at Uthan. "But I have never met anyone more successful." Uthan said nothing. There it was again. The uncomfortable way Amalie could rearrange his definition of things without raising her voice. Weeks passed. Their marriage slowly stopped feeling like a promise Uthan had been forced to keep. He began looking forward to coming home. Amalie laughed loudly when something was genuinely funny. She disliked expensive restaurants because, according to her, the plates are too big for the food. She persuaded Ethan to eat at a roadside diner where the owner called everyone honey. She once made him stop his car in the rain because she saw an elderly man struggling with a broken grocery bag. At first, Ethan thought she was naive. Then he realized she noticed people he had trained himself not to see. And somewhere along the way, Ethan began falling in love with his wife. The moment he understood it happened quietly. Emily had fallen asleep on the couch while reading. A storm rolled over the city. Thunder shook the windows. Ethan noticed that every time lightning flashed, Emily's fingers tightened around the blanket. The next morning, he asked about it. She hesitated. The night my mother died, there was a storm. Ethan said nothing. Emily continued. She had a seizure while walking home. Her voice thinned. She fell beside the road. No one found her until morning. Ethan felt pain spread through his chest. How old were you? 13. You were alone. Grandma was there. That's not what I asked. Emily looked at him. Ethan understood. Yes, she whispered, I felt alone. That night, another storm came. Ethan did not mention their conversation. He simply sat beside her until it passed. Emily noticed. Neither of them spoke about it. But when she reached for his hand, Ethan knew the marriage had changed. Then came the final betrayal. Charles requested a private meeting. He arrived at Ethan's office carrying a file. I have something you need to know about Emily. Ethan's expression hardened. Careful. Charles dropped photographs onto the desk. Emily meeting with an attorney. Emily entering the offices of a legal firm. Emily speaking with journalists outside a courthouse. Ethan stared. These were taken before your wedding, Charles said. Ethan's chest tightened. What are you suggesting? I'm suggesting your wife knew exactly what your company owed her family. She told me she knew some of it. She spoke with lawyers 6 months before your mother died. Charles leaned closer. She was preparing a lawsuit. Ethan looked again. The old poison of suspicion entered his mind. Had Emily married him for access? Had she played the patient village girl while preparing to take half the company? That evening, he confronted her. Emily did not deny meeting the lawyers. Yes. Ethan stared. Why didn't you tell me? Because nothing came from it. What did you ask them? Whether my grandmother could have her husband's name restored. And the money. I told them we didn't want it. Ethan laughed bitterly. Half the company is hundreds of millions of dollars, Emily. I know. And you expect me to believe you walked away. Emily went silent. Then she entered the bedroom and returned carrying an envelope. She handed it to him. It was a legal opinion dated 8 months earlier. Ethan read the final paragraph. Potential damages and ownership claims could exceed several $100 million. Below it, handwritten in Emily's neat script, were the words, "No lawsuit, Grandma wants the truth, not revenge." Ethan looked up. Emily's eyes were wet. I met the journalists because one of the lawyers leaked the story. I begged them not to publish it while your mother was sick. Ethan's stomach dropped. You protected my mother. She came here afterward. Emily wiped a tear. That was when she confessed. Ethan looked toward the photographs Charles had given him. Suddenly, he understood. His uncle had not come to protect him. He had come to divide them. Charles knew you were investigating. Yes. Did he threaten you? Emily did not answer. That was answer enough. What did he do? He offered me money. How much? $10 million. Ethan stared. To disappear. To sign an agreement saying my grandfather had never been a partner. Ethan's face became cold. And when you refused? He told me rich families survive because poor people eventually become tired. Emily looked at him. He said my grandmother would die before anyone believed her. Ethan stood. Why didn't you tell me? Because you had just buried your mother, because you were discovering your father's betrayal, because I didn't want every truth in your life to arrive like a weapon. The words broke something inside him. He moved closer. I accused you. Yes. I'm sorry. Emily stuttered him. Then she said, being sorry matters only if suspicion doesn't become a habit. Ethan nodded. You're right. The next morning, he called an emergency board meeting. Charles entered confidently. He left without a job. Investigators later discovered that Charles had spent years suppressing documents related to Henry Carter. He had also authorized payments to former employees in exchange for silence. The board removed him unanimously. But Ethan's biggest decision came afterward. At a press conference broadcast nationally, he stood before cameras. Emily and Ruth watched from the front row. Behind Ethan, the Reed Industries logo had been covered. Reporters whispered. Ethan approached the microphone. My name is Ethan Reed. The room became quiet. For most of my life, I believed my family built this company alone. He paused. That was false. Camera shutters clicked. Ethan continued. Nearly 50 years ago, Henry Carter co-founded the business that eventually became Reed Industries. His ideas, relationships, labor, and trust were essential to everything that followed. Ruth began crying. Emily held her hand. Henry Carter's ownership was unlawfully erased. Maury whispers. My father benefited from that injustice. Ethan swallowed. My mother knew enough to speak and remained silent for too long. Before her death, she chose finally to tell me the truth. He looked at Emily. And a family with every reason to seek revenge, instead, asked only to have their loved one's name restored. Ethan turned toward the covered logo. 2 employees pulled away the cloth. A new sign appeared. Reed Carter, FOODS. The room erupted. Ethan raised his voice. Effective today, the Carter family's legal ownership interest will be restored through a settlement recommended by independent counsel. Ruth covered her mouth. Emily stared at Ethan. He had not told them the amount. The settlement transferred 48% of the company's private family holdings to a Carter family trust, accounting for dilution that had occurred through outside investment. The trust was worth more money than Ruth or Emily could comprehend. But there was more. The Carter family has requested that a substantial portion of future distributions support rural schools, medical clinics, agricultural scholarships, and small farmers. Emily's eyes widened. Ruth turned toward her. That part had been Emily's idea. Ethan finished. My father taught me that winning mattered. He looked directly into the cameras. My mother taught me too late that truth matters more. Then his voice softened. And my wife taught me that returning what belongs to someone else is not generosity. He glanced at Emily. It is justice. Months later, Willow Creek changed. Not into a luxury development. Emily refused that idea immediately. We don't need mansions, she said. We need opportunity. The abandoned Carter mill was restored. Part of it became a museum, preserving the history of the farming cooperative. Another section became a training center where farmers learned modern agricultural techniques without surrendering ownership of their land. A medical clinic opened near the road where Emily's mother had died. Above its entrance were the words, "The Rachel Carter Community Health Center." On opening day, Emily stood beneath the sign for a long time. Ethan came beside her. "You okay?" She nodded, crying. She would have hated having a building named after her. Why? She hated attention. Ethan smiled. Then she saved the wrong future billionaire. Emily laughed through her tears. Ruth lived long enough to see Henry Carter's portrait installed beside William Reed's in company headquarters. When Ethan invited her to unveil it, she refused to pull the cloth. "You do it," she told him. "Why me?" "Because your father took it down." Her eyes held his. "You put it back." Ethan pulled the cloth. There was Henry, young, smiling, standing beside the old mill wheel. For several seconds, no one applauded. The silence itself felt sacred. Then Ruth whispered, "There you are." Ethan had to look away. A year after Margaret's death, he returned to her grave with Emily. He placed flowers beside the stone. For a long time, he said nothing. Then he smiled sadly. "You were right about her." Emily stood a few steps away, giving him privacy. Ethan touched his mother's name carved into the stone. "But you should have told me sooner." The wind moved through the trees. He imagined Margaret's answer. "I know." He remembered her final hours. The fear in her eyes. The urgency in her voice. "Promise me." For months, Ethan had believed the promise was about marriage. Now he understood. His mother had not only been trying to choose his wife. She had been trying to force him back toward the truth she had spent decades avoiding. She knew Ethan. She knew if she simply handed him documents, lawyers and executives might convince him to bury them. But if she tied his future to someone whose family carried the truth, he would be unable to escape it forever. It was imperfect, desperate, perhaps even unfair. But it had worked. As Ethan stood to leave, he noticed Emily watching him. "What?" she asked. "Nothing." "That's not true." He walked toward her. "I was thinking about our wedding night. The romantic evening where I handed you evidence that your family fortune was built on theft. That one." Emily smiled. "I've had better dates." Ethan laughed. Then his face softened. "Do you ever regret marrying me?" Emily pretended to think. "Sometimes." His eyebrows rose. "When?" "When you leave socks on the bathroom floor." "Emily." She laughed. Then she took his hand. "No." Ethan looked down at their fingers. "Why?" Emily was quiet for a moment. "Because your mother was right about one thing." "What?" "The boy who bought all my tomatoes was still in there." Ethan swallowed. "I just had to annoy him until he came back." They walked away from the grave together. Years later, people would tell the story in different ways. Some called it the story of a dying woman's final wish. Others called it the scandal that nearly destroyed one of the country's largest food companies. Business schools discussed Ethan's decision as a case study in corporate restitution. Journalists wrote about the Carter Trust. Farmers talked about the clinics and scholarships. But in Willow Creek, the older people told a simpler story. They said a rich man once returned to the village thinking he had come to marry a poor girl. Instead, he discovered that poverty had never made her family small. His money had merely made him unable to see how large they were. Amelie never became the glamorous society wife the magazines expected. She rarely attended celebrity events. She still visited vegetable markets. She still knew exactly when tomatoes were overpriced. When reporters asked what it felt like to go from selling vegetables to becoming one of the wealthiest women in the country, she always gave the same answer. "I didn't become more valuable when the papers changed." That sentence became famous. But Uthan understood it better than anyone. Because the world treated Amelie differently after her wealth became public. People who had mocked her village dress suddenly praised her simplicity. Women who had refused to sit beside her at charity dinners began requesting photographs. Executives who had called her uneducated now described her as insightful. Amelie noticed the hypocrisy. So did Uthan. One evening, they sat outside Ruth's house in Willow Creek. The same little home still stood. Amelie refused to demolish it. Nearby, children chased each other beneath the setting sun. Uthan looked at the house. "You could build anything here." "I know. Then why keep this?" Amelie smiled. "Because I don't want our children growing up thinking comfort is the same thing as character." Uthan turned toward her. "Our children." Amelie's smile widened. He stared. Then he understood. "Amelie." She nodded. Uthan stood so quickly that his chair fell backward. Ruth, watching from the doorway, burst out laughing. 9 months later, their daughter was born. They named her Mugrat Rachel Reed Carter. Mugrat for the woman who had finally chosen truth. Rachel for the woman who had once jumped into a river to save a little boy whose family had wronged hers. And Reed Carter so that neither side of the story would ever again be erased. When Uthan first held his daughter, he made her a promise. Not that she would inherit his wealth. Not that she would run the company. Not that she would carry the family legacy. He whispered something simpler. "You will know the truth about where you came from." Amelie heard him. She squeezed his hand. And in that quiet hospital room, Uthan finally understood what his mother had been trying to teach him all along. An inheritance is not merely what your parents leave in your hands. Sometimes it is the wrong they leave for you to repair. Sometimes it is the truth they were too frightened to speak. And sometimes the greatest gift you can give the next generation is not more wealth than you received. It is fewer lies. The Reed fortune survived. But the Reed lie did not. And the village girl everyone had mocked became the woman who helped a wealthy man recover something his millions had never been able to buy. A conscience strong enough to choose truth. A heart humble enough to admit wrong. And a life built not on what he could possess, but on what he was willing to restore. Dear viewers, if this story touched your heart, remember that we should never judge anyone by their clothes, their bank account, their education, or the place they call home. The person society calls poor may possess loyalty, courage, wisdom, and dignity that money can never purchase. Uthan inherited an empire, but Amelie helped him discover that no fortune is worth protecting when it depends on injustice and buried truth. If you believe people should have the courage to correct the wrongs of the past, honor those whose sacrifices have been forgotten, and choose character over status, kindly subscribe to the channel and turn on the notification bell for more powerful stories like this one. And tell us in the comments, if you were Uthan, would you have risked your family name and hundreds of millions of dollars to return what had been stolen? And if you were Amelie, could you have forgiven a family that had hidden the truth for so many years?